Good evening. You're very welcome to our beef research update from Teagasc Grange webinar, which will focus on suckler and dairy beef research highlights. I'm Catherine Egan, Teagasc beef specialist and host of the Beef Edge podcast, and I'll be your host this evening. We have a packed programme lined up for you where we'll be discussing current research findings from suckler and dairy beef systems and planned future research in Teagasc Grange. Joining me in studio are Teagasc Dairy Beef Researcher Jamie O'Driscoll, Teagasc Researcher on the Derrypatrick herd Dr. Peter Doyle, and Dr. Doreen Corridan, CEO at the National Cattle Breeding Centre. Please note this webinar is being recorded. We want this to be as interactive as possible, so please send in your questions at any stage using the Q&A tab. We'll do our best to get through as many as we can over the course of the programme. First up this evening, I'm delighted to be joined by Jamie O'Driscoll to give his presentation reviewing the current findings from the dairy beef research. Over to you, Jamie.
Thanks very much, Catherine. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jamie O'Driscoll and I'm a dairy beef systems researcher based in Teagasc Grange. And what I want to talk to you today is about the potential of dairy beef. And if we want to look at how we can unlock this potential, there's been a great uptake of sex semen over the last few years, with 1/3 of dairy AI serves in 2025 sexed female semen. With that, we also saw that 63% of calves born to dairy cows in 2025 were actually sired by a beef sire. So there's now a lot more beef sired calves for use in dairy beef systems. And that leads us into the Dairy Beef Index. The DBI is a tool for identifying beef bulls suitable for use on the dairy herd. And farmers who have a relationship with their local dairy farmer where they may purchase calves need to know about this index so they can advise farmers on suitable bulls for developing calves for their system. Within the DBI, there are 3 sub-indexes. So we have a calving sub-index, a beef sub-index and a carbon sub-index. But for the beef farmer, the beef sub-index is their primary concern. The CBV, or commercial beef value, is essentially the calving traits removed from the DBI as it's not needed for breeding animals, for non-breeding animals. The CBV allows beef farmers to have an idea of the potential profitability of calves derived from the dairy herd and beef herd. If we look at the CBV trends over the last 10 to 15 years, we see that there's been an increase in the CBV of dairy beef calves since 2022, with a reduction in the number of dairy cross dairy calves and an increase in the beef cross dairy sired calves. That leads us into the question of what is the potential if we correctly use the DBI to generate high CBV calves. So within our study, we used high beef genetic merit Angus, low beef genetic merit Angus and Holstein Friesian sires, managed across 3 production systems: grass only, low concentrate and high concentrate, with the main aim of the low concentrate and high concentrate groups being to potentially reduce slaughter age. If we look at sire genetic merit and look at our high and our low Angus groups, our high Angus are in the top 40% of the beef sub-index within the DBI, and our low Angus are in the bottom 60% of the beef sub-index within the DBI. But if you look at the overall DBI value of our high and our low Angus groups, they are essentially the same, but the difference lies in their beef sub-index, with greater than €100 versus less than €70. A primary difference in the genetic makeup of these sires is the carcass weight PTA, with our high Angus groups being plus 9.7 and our low Angus groups actually having a negative carcass weight PTA of -2. And how did this affect the CBV of these calves? Well, our high Angus sires produce calves with a CBV of €133 or 4 to 5 star, with our low Angus sires producing calves of a CBV of €92 ranging from 1 to 3 stars. A bit on our treatments. Our grass-only calves, low concentrate calves and high concentrate all underwent a common calf rearing period, with differences being imposed during the summer grazing seasons. Our grass-only calves graze pasture alone during their first grazing season, with our low concentrate and high concentrate calves receiving a kilo concentrate throughout the first grazing season. In autumn, because of declining pasture quality, all calves are supplemented with 1 kilogram of concentrate. And over the first winter, all calves received a common diet of high quality grass silage plus 1.5 kg of concentrate. During the second grazing season, our grass only and low concentrate groups grazed pasture alone, with our high concentrate group receiving 3 kg of concentrate from the 1st of July, increasing to 5 kg of concentrate from the 15th of August. Steers were deemed fit for slaughter upon reaching a body condition score of 3.75, equal to a 3+ on the Europe grid. Any steers deemed unsuitable for finish from pasture were housed for a conventional finishing period on grass silage plus 5 kg of concentrate. Just a bit on animal performance across the three genotypes. We can see here is that the differences in performance is seen from time of first housing, with our high Angus calves significantly heavier than both our low Angus and Holstein Friesian group. These differences were maintained throughout the rest of their lifetime. By the time of second housing, we can still see a significant difference between our high and low Angus groups as well as Holstein Friesian. And this is primarily due to the greater lifetime average daily gain of the high Angus group. And although 40 grams a day may seem like a low amount of weight, when that's spread across an animal's entire lifetime, that compounds into a lot of kilos of live weight gain. On carcass performance, we can see here that our high Angus steers were 18 kilos heavier at time of finish than our low Angus group. And although our Holstein Friesian steers were slightly heavier than our high Angus and significantly heavier than our low Angus steers, this was at a much greater finishing age. We can see from this slide that age at finish was affected by breed substitution, with our Angus steers always finished younger regardless of system. We can also see that we had the ability to manipulate finishing age of our Angus steers, with both Angus groups having a slaughter age of 40 days younger than their counterparts in grass only and low concentrate within the high concentrate group. However, we were unable to manipulate age at finish for our Holstein Friesian steers. But where we do see major differences come in between our high and our low merit Angus groups is in terms of carcass weight across the three systems. We can see here that our high Angus steers had the ability to maintain their carcass weight regardless of system. However, our low Angus group within the high concentrate group had a much lower carcass weight than within grass only or low concentrate. High Angus steers had the ability to use the extra energy within their diet in the high concentrate group, continue to grow frame, and as well as put down enough fat to allow age at finish at the end of the second grazing season. And I guess, how did this affect overall farm systems profitability? And this is something that's becoming ever more important given the current market prices. At a base beef price of €7 a kilo, a finishing concentrate price of €350 a tonne, protected urea price of €550 a tonne, and a calf price of €440 for our Angus and €300 for Holstein Friesian, we can see here that our high Angus steers were significantly more profitable than our Holstein Friesian group, and were still more profitable than their low Angus counterparts also. This is due to the fact that they had a higher carcass weight than their low Angus counterparts, therefore maintaining a higher carcass output per hectare within their farm system. Something that's really evident here is the effect of concentrate supplementation, and our high Angus group maintained profit between our grass only and our high concentrate group. However, profit was reduced with extra concentrate supplementation for our low Angus and our Holstein Friesian steers due to the lack of increase in carcass output per hectare. So in summary, supplementation during the second grazing season allowed Angus cross dairy steers to achieve a reduced finishing age while still producing a market acceptable carcass for our high Angus group. High Angus steers were more profitable than both low Angus and Holstein Friesian steers, and we were unable to manipulate finishing age of our Holstein Friesian group. And I guess this all comes down to the fact that it's about matching the correct genotype to the correct system. There's no point in trying to maybe push finishing age on our Holstein Friesian steers, but if we have the correct Angus cross Holstein Friesian steer, we may be able to finish these cattle before a second housing period. Now we're going to go across to a video that we recorded last week to look at the latest iteration of the Grange Dairy Beef System study. Thank you. I'm here below in the Derrypatrick Beef Research Systems herd in Teagasc Grange, and the cattle you see behind me are the current cohort of 2025 born weanlings on the study. Look, due to the inclement weather we've been having, they've still been housed, but we'll be looking to get these cattle out to grass in the next fortnight. They were housed on the 4th of December and have been offered a high quality diet of 76 DMD red clover silage at 1.5 kilograms of concentrate. Performance to date has been good, with an average daily gain of 0.78 kilos per day, with current live weight standing at 315 kilos. Preliminary results from this study, as well as these cattle behind me, will be on display at the Teagasc Beef Open Day on July 1st.
Thank you, Jamie. You gave a great presentation there on an insight in dairy calf to beef systems. The results you presented show huge variation in the genetic merit between the high and the low Aberdeen Angus. What's the actual difference you would have expected in carcass and conformation?
Yeah, so Catherine, if you go back through the slides there, what we would have expected was, if we look at plus 9.7 kilos in our high Angus group versus negative 2 kilos in our low Angus, you're talking 11.7 kilo difference based on carcass weight PTA. But we actually got an 18 kilo difference in carcass weight between our two groups. Look, there's various factors that play there in terms of management, health, etc. that could have played into that. But yes, we would have expected such a difference between the two groups. And
you mentioned the 3 different treatments there. Based on the findings, what treatment aspects could be implemented at farm level, or what impact would they have at farm level on profitability?
Yeah, so I guess, Catherine, it's all about looking at your farm system as a whole and looking at the animals on your farm. If we were to have a farm of ideally all high merit Angus calves or high CBV calves, you have a much greater flexibility. These calves were both profitable in our high concentrate group and in our grass only group. Whereas if we took animals such as our low Angus or Holstein Friesian, they needed to be grown out more and were more suitable to our more conventional system within the grass only group. So it's about looking at what you have on your farm in terms of shed space. Do you have housing for all these animals? Do you have enough forage for the entire winter? And if these are becoming issues for you on farm, it's good to look at the CBV of the calves you have available, and can I take a proportion of these calves and potentially get them finished from grass during the second grazing season. But look, it's all about the management throughout their entire life and ensuring they hit their average daily gain targets throughout.
So it's worth really looking at your own farm system and what calf will suit that best.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, in an ideal world, you'd buy all of the one type of calf and implement it on that system. But, at farm level, we often see a difference in calf types. Moreover, within the Dairy Beef 500 programme, there's farmers who have both Holstein Friesian calves and Angus, and they could have late maturing calves as well. So it's about fitting that calf into the right system on your farm.
That's great, Jimmy. Doreen, thank you very much for joining us on our panel discussion this evening. Can you briefly outline NCBC's role in Irish cattle breeding and how its programmes support both beef and dairy farmers?
Thank you, Catherine. Basically, in NCBC, we're 50% owned by Munster Bovine and by Progressive Genetics. And what we do is we run their 3 breeding programmes, their dairy programme, their dairy beef, and the suckler beef. In the dairy, we're really focused on EBI, to deliver profitability and sustainability. On the dairy beef, especially for the last 4 or 5 years, what we're really focused on is not to compromise milk production, so to end up with easy calving, short gestation calves born that are very lively, suck quickly, and then that will go on to be extremely profitable for the beef purchasers from the point of view of carcass weight, carcass conformation and age of finish. In the suckler then, AI is much lower, it's down at less than 18%. We have 2 groups of cattle there, the terminal for the herd on the want to finish cattle, and then the replacement to actually breed the females.
I suppose based on what Jamie has presented tonight, what genetic traits should farmers focus on when they're selecting calves this spring based on the dairy beef index and the commercial beef value?
Okay, we have 2 types of farmers involved there. Firstly is the dairy farmer, and I think with dairy farmers the first thing is decide what breed you want. And once you've decided what breed, you've essentially 3 groups of cows in your farm. You have your maiden heifers, you have your second calvers, and you have your mature cow. So you decide then what level of calving you're comfortable with. What did you use last year? Did you get on well with? Was it 3.5? Was it 4? And then that'll decide your level of calving. So for each group you have your maidens, your second calvers and matures. Select the highest BSI animal possible with your acceptable calving. So if you take Angus at the moment, you would be looking at, selected Angus is about 110, 120 BSI.
And in relation to the commercial beef farmer, for beef farmers that's buying dairy beef calves, what would you be advising them?
Beef farmers buying CBV, it's a very, very good indicator of future profitability. So essentially what you'd be looking for is go to high CBV farms, because usually when you go to a farm you have to buy them all. So try and go to a high CBV farm. because the higher CBV, the more profitable you'll actually have. And also make sure that the animals are genomically tested, because that will give you a far more accurate CBV, because you're sure the sire, you're sure of the dam.
That's great, Doreen. Thanks very much. Thanks, Jamie, and thanks, Doreen. Next, we go to Peter Doyle, who will present his research on suckler calf to beef systems being carried out on the Derrypatrick herd. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Catherine. So good evening, everyone. My name is Peter Doyle, and I'm here to talk about the update on the Derrypatrick Suckler Calf to Beef Research herd. So I'd like to thank the Walsh scholars, Peter Bennett and Sarah Armstrong, for doing all the hard work and collecting the data and analysing the data, and also thank Paul Crossan, Mark McGee, Nicky Byrne and Michael O'Donovan. So look, when we talk about the challenges and opportunities that are currently in Irish beef systems over the past number of years, obviously controlling costs is a huge problem. Particularly our three largest costs on beef farms are machinery costs, purchase concentrates and purchase fertiliser. And if we talk about the environmental sustainability, methane is our largest greenhouse gas emissions, followed by nitrous oxide. So improving animal performance to reduce finishing age is important for methane emissions, and reducing our fertiliser use is important for nitrous oxide emissions. So from this, I suppose, what we were looking at is to see can clover obviously reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, but also can improve our animal performance. So in the Derrypatrick herd in Teagasc Grange, we had an objective to evaluate the inclusion of red and white clover on beef, cattle, animal and farm systems performance. And we also wanted to look at, I suppose, is a low finishing age like 19 months, I suppose, a possible system going forward in the future for beef systems. Also, I suppose it was on a suckler calf to beef system, so we were stocked at 170 kilos of organic N to the hectare, so we weren't in nitrates derogation but still relatively highly stocked. We are looking at this experiment over 3 production cycles, and 2 of these have been completed to date, with the 3rd one ongoing. So the first, I suppose, set of treatments that we had was 2 pasture treatments. We had a grass only sward versus a grass clover system, with, I suppose, half the fertiliser nitrogen being applied on that clover system. We also had 2 sire breed treatments, Aberdeen Angus versus Charolais. With regard to the sire selection within our sire breed treatments, I suppose when you're picking sires, you want to pick a sire that's going to help overcome challenges in your production system. So that's going to be different for every farm. But in this particular case, I suppose when we're finishing off grass at 19 months of age, a key challenge with that is going to be getting weight for age and, I suppose, fat cover on those animals at that very young age. So for that reason, we picked for specific traits such as 5-star for carcass weight within breed to have high weight for age. We also had to try get improved fleshing ability on the animals, so we picked 1 and 2-star for carcass fat, so it's the opposite to what you think, where 1 and 2 stars gives you a fatter animal. But bearing in mind that when you select for that fatness, it does decrease your conformation a little bit, so that's one thing to be considered. In terms of the pasture systems, we have 164 acres there on the Derrypatrick platform, so 82 acres of it was assigned to a grass only system and the other 82 to a grass clover system. And within that grass clover system, we had red clover silage in a 3-cut system on 15% of the area, and the rest of the area for the clover system was white clover, which is for your grazing ground and the first cut silage ground. In terms of the animals, we had 80 cows in the system. So 40 animals would have been assigned to a grass only system for life. So that means a cow and calf were, I suppose, on a grass only sward for the first grazing season, following which the calf was weaned at the end of the grazing season to go inside and they're on grass silage plus 1.5 kilos of meal at the end of that first winter to go back out to grass at 12 months of age onto a grass only sward, and at the end of that grazing season at 19 months of age they're finished from pasture. The other half of the animals are on a grass clover system. So the cow and calf were together on a grass white clover sward. Calf is weaned, he's inside and he's on red clover silage plus 1.5 kilos of meal, following which he's turned out at the same time as the other group at 12 months of age in March. He's on a white clover sward and again finished at the end of the grazing season at 19 months of age. So we didn't feed any concentrates because we wanted to have a clean, I suppose, comparison across the pasture systems. In terms of the results that we have to date so far, so over the 2 years completed, we're seeing that over that grazing season, the cows on the grass white clover swards were 16 kilos heavier at weaning than those cows on grass only swards. in terms of the progeny live weight over the 2 years. So this graph here in front of me is the live weight, where the red line is grass clover animals and the blue line is grass only. And what we're seeing at weaning time is that those calves that are on the grass clover, white clover system, they are 14 kilos heavier at weaning. So at today's price around €5.50, that's worth an extra €77 per head for those clover animals. Then they came in over the first winter and they're on red clover silage versus the grass ones are on grass silage, both on meal. And what we're seeing is that there's a higher live weight on the red clover silage than the grass silage of an extra 0.1 kilos a day. So by the time they're turned out at 12 months of age, there is now a 25 kilo live weight difference in favour of the clover animals. But what we're seeing is that they nearly grew too well over the first winter on the red clover silage with meal. So there was a little bit of compensatory growth for the grass animals during that second grazing season, to the point that there's only a 15 kilo live weight difference at finish. So across 2 years we're seeing very consistent results up to that turnout weight of 25 kilos, but we've seen a bit of contrasting results during that second grazing season, where the first year there was no compensatory growth and the second year there was a bit of compensatory growth for the grass only animals. So in terms of the average daily gains on these systems, as I said, look, we're getting higher average daily gains pre-weaning for the clover system. We're getting higher average daily gain on the red clover silage over the grass silage, but it's well above that target of 0.5 to 0.6 kilos per day. So perhaps we might look into not feeding meal to that clover system. And then you can see there's a little bit of compensatory growth for that grass only system over that second grazing season. So when we look at the carcass traits, we have a 15 kilo heavier live weight, as I said, and that's resulting in a 10.4 kilo heavier carcass for that clover system. So we are getting 740 of a base price there last October when we finished them. With the bonuses, we're getting, I suppose, €80 extra in carcass value per head for those clover animals. And it's important to note there was only 241 kilos of concentrates fed from pre-weaning to the end of first winter to each of the animals, and there is no meal fed during the finishing phase to have that clean pasture systems comparison. So just want to, I suppose, remind everyone that all of the animals were finished on the very same day at the end of the grazing season to get that pasture systems comparison. So Angus heifers would have been finished the same time as the steers, and the same as the Charlotte steers. But with those Angus heifers we're getting very, I suppose, well finished animals. There are 100% of them had a fat score of greater than 2+. They had a 300 kilo carcass, they're R- and a fat score of 4-. In terms of the Charolais heifers, 93% of them were greater than a fat score of 2+, 312 kilo carcass, R equals 3-, with the option you could feed them on more if you want to, a little bit, whether it be supplementation or indoors, but they're also adequately finished at pasture with no meal, which is a positive result. Angus steers, 98% of them were greater than a fat score of 2+. Again, they had a 335 kilo carcass, R- 3 equals. And with the Charolais steers, only 78% of them were finished with a fat score of greater than 2+, and they had a similar carcass weight but to the Angus's, but we are seeing that the late maturans obviously have a higher conformation score and a lower fat score. So obviously, look, in that system when they're all finished at the same age, naturally enough the Charolais weren't, I suppose, all finished. So the next phase of the Derrypatrick study is going to be looking at different concentrate finishing strategies to push those Charolais steers up to higher weights at the end of the grazing season. But overall, look, in the Derrypatrick farm system with very good forage management, such as putting red clover into your silage swards, white clover into your grazing swards, and I suppose picking a suitable dam for your system and picking sires with specific traits to match your system, you can get very good animal performance from very much a forage based system. So look, it's there's great flexibility and achievements there that can be made. In terms of the herbage production, we're seeing over the last 3 years there's similar herbage production between the grass only and grass clover swards, but we're applying 60 units of nitrogen to the acre less on that grass clover system, which is, I suppose, saving us about €90 per cow unit. In terms of, look, people are going to have a lot of questions around managing red and white clover. We don't have time to get into huge detail on that in this presentation, but we will be covering that in a lot of detail I suppose, in the management of these swards in the Future Beef webinar on the 14th of April, and as well at Grange Open Day on the 1st of July. But just a quick note on red clover, it's generally meant for silage ground only. It's not suitable for frequent grazing. It can only really be established via reseeding. And if you have good varieties and good management, it can last 3 to 6 years. But if you have bad varieties and poor management, it can struggle to last in the sward. And with that red clover, it does have higher end fixation potential than the white clover, so it's typically under very close to zero nitrogen systems. Regarding the white clover, that's more suitable to grazing ground. In the Derrypatrick, we oversow the majority of our white clover in April. It does have good persistence of up to over 10 years with good management, but it has a lower nitrogen fixation than red clover, and we typically would be applying nitrogen, particularly in spring, on that white clover ground. Obviously, look, bloat is a question that many people are going to have when we talk about clover. So look, just spot talking from our own perspective in the Derrypatrick, we didn't have any fatalities to bloat over the last 3 years of this study. But look, it is important to remain vigilant. Your high risk periods for bloat is going to be on high clover swards, particularly if your cattle are not acclimatised to a clover system. And those conditions, I suppose, of bloat will be increased where you have lush grass, wet conditions, reseeded swards. So it's best now maybe not to let hungry cattle into those swards where they can gorge, and maybe just be careful with weanings around weaning time where there might be a bit extra stress. So the management strategies used to prevent bloat is we can use bloat oil in the water trough, or add a bit of fibre in the diet like hay along the fence side, or given 24-hour allocations like strip wires, etc. Now, I suppose a lot of questions around what profits are this year. Look, it's been a great year for beef farming in terms of, I suppose, the carcass prices increase. So looking at the net margins per hectare, excluding our payments, our direct payments, we're talking €1,400 per hectare for our grass clover system and €1,230 for our grass only system. So an extra €170 per hectare there. But a lot of people are interested in the profit per cow unit. So when I say cow unit, I mean the cow plus her calf plus her yearling progeny. And what we're seeing is costing us €1,580 to get a calf from birth all the way through to finish, and that's including the cost of the cow. Remember, that's in a low cost system where we're using low concentrates and a relatively low amount of fertiliser, and as a result we're getting a net margin per cow unit excluding our payments of €1,000 on the grass only system and €1,137 on the grass clover system. So that extra €137 per cow unit for the clover system, we've 80 cows on the farm, so that's worth an extra €11,000 to us in the Derrypatrick herd. In terms of where is that extra profit coming from on the clover system, you have better, I suppose, animal performance, so you have a higher carcass value for each animal. You're also saving €90 per head on your fertiliser bill, and I suppose there are extra costs in the clover system such as oversowing. We oversow 25% of the farm, as well as putting a bit of bloat oil in the water trough at dangerous time points of the year. But all in all, even with that cost, we're still up €137 per cow unit. So look, in conclusion, to date, that clover system, it is delivering a 14 kilo heavier weaning weight per animal, a 10 kilo heavier carcass weight, lower nitrogen input, and €137 extra profit per cow unit. So, and just on the genetics, your sire selection should be representative of what your farm system is trying to achieve. So that's going to be different on different farms. I would like to thank particularly Peter Bennett and Sarah Armstrong, who are the Walsh scholars collecting all the data on this Derrypatrick farm systems, as well as our technicians MJ, John, Edwin and Finton, and our farm managers and farm staff such as Christy for all their help throughout the year. So look, that's all the research done to date in the Derrypatrick. Peter Bennett and Sarah Armstrong now are going to talk you through a video about what the next phase of the Derrypatrick is going to entail. Thank you.
In the current phase of the Derrypatrick system, we've identified an optimum finishing system where Angus steers and heifers, along with Charley heifers, can be finished off grass at 19 months of age with no meal input at finishing. The next phase of the Derrypatrick work will focus on identifying the optimum system for these Charley cows behind me, particularly for the steers, where both Charolais steers and heifers will be finished at pasture using 2 different meal finishing strategies during the autumn period. The target is for Charolais steers to achieve an average carcass weight of 380 kilos and the Charolais heifers to reach 340 kilos. This allows us to maintain a low age at finish of 19 months while increasing the overall carcass output per hectare.
Pasture system comparison will also continue. Half of the progeny born will be assigned to a grass-only sward, while the other half of the progeny born will be on grass clover swards. However, in this next phase, 1.5 kilos of concentrates per head per day will only be fed over the winter to cattle receiving grass silage. No concentrates will be fed to animals on red clover grass silage. The aim here is to use red clover silage to reduce concentrate use and fertiliser nitrogen, rather than to drive extra animal performance during the first winter. Results from this trial will become available as the study progresses, and the cattle will be on display at the Teagasc Beef Open Day on the 1st of July.
Thanks very much, Peter. That was a great review of the suckler to beef research being carried out in Teagasc Grange. You mentioned some of the highline figures on the role of clover in a suckler calf to beef system. Are there any trials completed looking at the role of clover in weaning to beef or a store to beef system?
Yeah, so we did look at it within weaned to beef system before we done the calf to beef system. So we had, I suppose, suckler cattle doing a similar growth rate on grass silage over that first winter. Then in the springtime at 12 months of age, half of them went to a grass clover, the other half to a grass only system. And by the end of that second grazing season, just over 1 grazing season, they had a 14 kilo heavier carcass weight on that white clover system, the weaned to beef system. Likewise, going back to the 1990s, Eddie O'Riordan done it in a store to beef system over that third grazing season, and same again, cattle on the grass clover swards had 12 kilo heavier carcass weights than the ones on the grass only sward for those store cattle. So the science doesn't change as the years go on.
That's great, Peter. And farmers looking at your presentation tonight and considering they might be going to incorporate clover. Based on your experience and carrying out the research that you mentioned, what advice have you for the current or the best way to incorporate and grow clover?
Yes, so for red clover, look, reseeding is really the only option, and it does work well if you follow the correct steps, particularly in the springtime. For white clover, look, reseeding is the gold standard, but you can also do it successfully with oversown if you do it at the right conditions in April and May and have the good soil fertility, obviously, and just keep grazing out the swards, keeping that low covers for light to get to the base of the sward. So we done a lot of oversown in Derrypatrick in April time.
And you mentioned there like good soil fertility. What do you mean by good soil fertility when it comes to white clover?
Yeah, so look, you have to be at a pH of around 6.3 and your P and K indexes would need to be up at 3. To be honest, I wouldn't, if your soil fertility wasn't up at that, I wouldn't even try to put in white clover. You're probably wasting your time. So get your soil fertility correct before you even try to put it in.
That's great, Peter. Doreen, based on Peter's presentation, farmers are selecting AI sires or bulls for their farm system. What could they learn and implement for their farm?
Yeah, I think looking at Peter's system, probably when you started that experiment, Peter, beef price was low and concentrate was much more expensive than it is now.
It was, yeah.
So what Peter was essentially looking for was what can grass get us to? And I think clearly it didn't exploit the potential of the Charolais from the point of view of growth rate and food conversion efficiency, because with those Charolais they're well more capable of adding on another 30, 40 or 50 kilos of carcass, what was achieved here. And so it's a case of horses for courses. So that if you're finishing cattle and going finishing them indoor with high carcass, and you're looking for high carcasses, you select more high carcass animals. While if you're looking to finish off grass, what you basically select is animals that have an earlier age of finish and that'll put on a high fat score earlier.
I suppose breeding season 2026 is around the corner. What would you be recommending for farmers this year, Peter?
Yes, look, I suppose there's loads of good high terminal index bulls out there, but there's such a wide selection which one is best for your farm system. So you need to think about whatever system you have at home. Say if you're wheelings, you might be interested in getting more shape on them, so you'd look at the conformation PTA. If you're lacking a bit in weight and you're for finishing cattle, you might look at carcass weight PTA. Or if you're struggling to get them finished, you might say, oh, I could do an easy fleshing animal. You might look at carcass fat PTA and you select for 1-2 stars for carcass fat, get the flesh on them. So whatever you want for your system within those high terminal index bulls, choose your specific traits.
And that's hugely important depending on if you're a weaning system or a finishing system.
Correct, yeah.
That's great. I suppose, Doreen, you know, we've had a huge interest in recent years, particularly in the myostatin gene. What do farmers need to be aware of when they're selecting sires with regard to the myostatin gene?
Okay, essentially with the myostatin genes, we're mainly talking about the disruptive ones when we talk, which is the Q204X or DNT821. And these are the ones that will really give you the hard muscling and the really good shape. So if I was looking for animals to be finished before the second winter, I certainly wouldn't be looking for the myostatin gene. However, if I was looking for the show animals to hit Carrick in November, I would be looking for, I mean, the real double muscle animals at that stage for the show scene. Or if I was producing weanlings for sale to be exported, or if I wanted to push on for heavy carcasses and good shape, I would look for it. Now with the NGP, and we've so many more animals genotyped, you'd look at what your cows carrying and look at what your bull's carrying, and just mix and match accordingly and know how easy the cows are calved. And we're learning more and more about it every day. And just because you have the double muscle gene does not mean that the animal is going to be more difficult calving, because we've plenty bulls, I mean, that are average calving, like the Limousine Rolex or Orby de Charlie, and they are carrying, I mean, the NTs and the Qs.
That's great, Doreen. I suppose, Jamie, there's an increase in price being paid for calves this spring. What has your research shown with regard to the impact of calf and beef price on farm profit?
Yeah, so Catherine, if you look at that study, we were talking about a farm system doing in and around a net margin of €2,500 per hectare. But every €100 increase in calf price is going to reduce your profit per head by €100, and as well as that, reduce profit per hectare by €320 also, because we're purchasing 3.2 calves per hectare. In addition, you know, these systems, these high carcass output systems, are more suspect to a drop in beef price. So 50 cents drop in beef price down to €6.50 would reduce profit between €450 and €500 per hectare. So this combined with paying too much for calves, you know, has potential negative effects on farm profit.
So it's really important this year of all years that farmers do a farm budget and assess based on their system.
Yeah, absolutely, Catherine. Yeah.
And Doreen, I suppose, based on what Jamie has mentioned there, you know, given the prices being paid, what should farmers be considering when buying calves this spring?
I think, firstly, from a dairy point of view, they're getting good money for calves this spring. So what really dairy herd owners need to do is make sure they're selling a healthy calf that'll thrive on and do very well for the guy that's buying the calf to make sure he's profitable going forward. So the first thing is make sure the calf actually got enough beastings. And if you could at all, there is plenty of evidence now that if you give a second feed, of beastings, to the calves, that really helps. The other thing then is to feed them well until such time they're sold, whether it's 3 weeks or 4 weeks, because beef calves are heavier than the dairy calves and they need to be getting 20% of their body weight. So essentially a 40 kilo calf will be needing to get 4 litres in the morning and 4 litres in the evening. Right? Make sure their navels are done. Ideally they horn them before the beef guy takes them, but the most important thing is, look, Penny, give them an intranasal vaccine, because for the price the buyer is paying, it's very important they're getting a healthy calf. And then for the guy buying the calf, try and buy a high CV as you possibly can. In the traditional, 170 on the top third, continental 270 on the top third, but it all depends on price.
Most definitely. You heard in the videos earlier about the upcoming open day in Teagasc Grange. Paul Crossan outlines what you can expect to see on the day in this short video. If you have any questions for the panel, please submit them through the Q&A tab.
The Grange Beef Open Day takes place here at Teagasc Grange on Wednesday the 1st of July. This is the Teagasc flagship event for 2026 and comes at a time of great change for the beef sector in Ireland and globally, with record high prices being achieved. There is clearly a great opportunity to increase incomes on beef farms by adopting best practice, increasing output and managing costs in well-managed grass-based systems. At Beef 2026, we will highlight the latest research in suckler beef systems, how we can increase beef output by optimising clover use, selecting the best genetics and calving at 2 years of age, the importance of dairy beef continues to grow. At the Open Day, the latest research in early life management, health and dairy beef genetics will be presented. By operating efficient grass-based systems, we also aim to improve the environmental performance of our production systems. This remains a key goal for us. On the day, meet the participants on our demonstration suckler and dairy beef farm programs. They will show you how they have adopted these new practices and how they were best implemented on their farms. I look forward to seeing you at Beef 2026 on Wednesday the 1st of July at Teagasc Grange.
A great day for all involved, I'm sure, the 1st of July 2026 for the Grange Open Day in Teagasc Grange. Lots of questions coming in here to the panel on the Q&A. A lot of questions in relation to blue tongue. Maybe, Doreen, if you want to take a question in relation to it. I suppose from a lot of farmers concerned and worried in relation to breeding season coming, a lot of outbreaks in the last number of weeks. What's your advice, or do you want to make a comment?
I think, Catherine, we escaped it for long enough. I mean, it was inevitable to come at this stage. The thinking now is it came in last September because we have a number of animals that's positive. And also we've, in the recent past, we've had 2 positive abortions for blue tongue. The advice for breeding farmers is very, very clear, is vaccinate. There's a vaccination available. It's for BTV3. It's from Boehringer. It's 2 shots 3 weeks apart, and you'll have immunity 3 weeks later. So essentially it's 6 weeks between the first shot and immunity. So if you take the peak mid-season is May, June, July, August, so try and get in, do you know what I mean, your second shot, so your 6 weeks are up before the first week of May. Because in breeding herds, and we've learned this from Europe, and it's quite clear in herds that vaccinated, they really had much, much less symptoms than herds that didn't. And the symptoms you can get, if you get blue tongue in early pregnancy, what you end up with is you end up with early embryonic death and empty cows at the back end, which is very expensive in both dairy herds and in both suckler herds.
Most definitely.
If you get the blue tongue in mid-pregnancy, what you end up with then is, we call them dummy calves. They have brain defects, they're slow to suck, and some of them are incompatible with life. So you spend a lot of time trying to get this calf to suck, and eventually, I mean, they just don't make it. And then if you get the blue tongue in late pregnancy, what you end up with is you could end up with no signs, you could end up with calves born carrying the virus, you could end up with late abortions, or you could end up with deaths around it. And where blue tongue really affects is breeding bulls. So the evidence is very clear that in breeding herds especially, vaccinate for blue tongue, the females and the males, all the animals at the one time. It's a dead vaccine, so it's very safe to use in pregnant animals and very safe to use in empty animals. So get it in before the breeding season. Contact your vet, as the vet has to be licensed and he has to submit an application, do you know what I mean, for your herd. But the evidence is very clear, Catherine.
So breeding season around the corner, it's important for farmers to speak with their local vet at this stage.
Absolutely, speak with their local vet, yeah.
Jamie, a question for you from David. I buy 200 calves every spring. If I'm standing at the mart, what is the minimum CBV should I be looking for?
Yes, I guess, Catherine, as Doreen said earlier, that's a bit breed specific. But what you want to be selecting always is calves that are 4 or 5 stars in the CBV, and a calf that has a positive genotype in the NGP programme. This will be displayed on the mart board next to his overall CBV value. So to buy a calf in the top third for an early maturing breed, you're €170 and €270 for a continental sired calf from the dairy herd. But that information is on the mart board, and I'd be saying 4 and 5 stars, if at all possible.
That's great, and I suppose this kind of links with it. For finishers buying calves, how reliable is CBV at 2 to 3 weeks of age in predicting the final carcass weight and profitability?
Yeah, so if you look at our own study there, Catherine, we saw an 18 kilo difference in carcass weight between our 4 and 5 star CBV Angus and 1 to 3 star CBV Angus. And every €1 difference in CBV led to a €1.71 difference in favour of the high CBV calves. So it actually ended up being more than what was expected through their CBV.
That's great. And
So the CBV is very accurate, Catherine, especially if the calf is genotyped, because you've verified the sire, you've verified the dam, and the amount of data that's there now with genotype animals going through the system is probably the most accurate index that's out there.
that's great.
And
Doyle.
at 3 weeks of age, it's the same genes a calf has as 3 years of age.
And the fact they're genotype now, as you say, that gives a huge amount of information that probably wasn't there if we look back 10 years plus.
Absolutely.
Question, I often struggle with my heifers when it comes to meat and carcass spec in terms of light carcass weight or over fat. What can I do in the future to try and avoid this? Do you want to cover that, Doreen?
I presume, Catherine, it's more traditional heifers they're talking about. As if you look at Jamie's study there in his Angus heifers, and they were out of Limousin cross British Friesian cows, and at 19 months they were 300 kilo carcass and at 4 minus. So if you have an Angus that's quite low in carcass weight, as you have a lot of Angus bulls out there at 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 kilos carcass weight, these are the heifers that'll be fat score 5, so I mean, and that'll kill out at 200, 220 kilo carcass. So the way to overcome that is go for a better Angus. I mean, because in Jamie's study there, a 9 kilo Angus was a good bull a couple of years ago. We now have bulls 10, 12, 14, and some of the genotype bulls coming along at 18 and 19 kilo carcass. So the answer to that is select an Angus bull with high carcass weight, high CBV.
Do you want to make a comment on that, Jamie, in relation to your research?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is seen in the Johnstone Castle heifer studies as well in dairy calf to beef systems. The high CBV Angus calves are producing heavier carcasses at the end of that second grazing season. So it is all really coming back to what Doreen says. This CBV is a very, very accurate indication of the potential ability of this calf. It's an estimated reading value for the animal itself. It's taking genotyped information of its dam and its sire, and look, it is proving very accurate.
That's great. Peter, you mentioned the red clover in your presentation. Is there a difference between cuts in red clover silage in animal performance?
Yeah, there is definitely. Catherine, it's a good point to bring up. Look, for first cut silage, you have actually very low red clover content. You're typically only talking 14-15% clover. So 85% of that silage is grass silage. And Nicky Byrne done a finishing study, and when he fed first cut red clover silage versus first cut grass silage, there's no difference in finishing cattle performance. However, when you go to second cuts and third cuts, they have 50% clover and 90% clover in them respectively. So it's them real high clover contents in those second and third cuts. They have drive differences in animal intakes, which drives a difference in animal performance in favour of red clover silages. So in summary, second and third cuts for red clover, high clover contents, high intakes, high performance. First cut, very little clover, so it's much the same as grass silage.
Okay, that's great. What percentage of paddocks would realistically be suitable for oversowing on a heavy soil farm?
Yeah, so I suppose, look, with oversowing, when you oversow it, you have to keep it at a real low grazing cover to let light down to the base of the new clover plant. So you're typically grazing it every, say, 2 weeks for the first 3 or 4 rotations. So you can only really do like, say, 25% or 15% of your paddocks on the farm, because you can't keep all the paddocks at that extremely low cover. So only pick a few paddocks each year and look at, obviously pick your best fertile fields and a field that's relatively open base compared to a field that has a thick base, and you do a certain proportion then each year. But it does, although it's a little bit more difficult on heavy farms, it certainly is working on heavy farms. We see it in Ballyhaise and in Grange, and yeah.
And this question kind of links in with it. How is the bloat oil added to the water troughs to reduce bloat? Is it a matter of adding it manually or on a daily basis?
Yeah, so what we do, look, it depends on what bloat oil you have. Look at the back of the bottle to see what that tells you, what concentration you put in. Depends on the size of your water trough, etc. But we put it in the day before the animals come into the field, and then we put it in every morning and evening when we're there checking the cattle. Just pour in the correct amount that tells you, give it a stir. But one thing to note with bloat oil, sometimes you need it when the pastures are wet and lush, and there mightn't be a huge amount of cattle actually drinking the water. So sometimes they mightn't actually consume a huge amount of bloat oil, so it's no harm to have a bit of like hay or straw underneath the fence, just as a bit of fibre source for them there to graze too.
That's great, Peter. Doreen, a question for you. How do dairy calf to beef farmers know where the high CBV farms, is there a matter of asking the dairy farmer what bulls he's using before you go to look at the calves?
Oh, absolutely. In the sense that every dairy farmer will have his predicted, based on his AI or stock bull data, he'll have his predicted CBV, the calves, and then if they're in the NGP and if they're genotyped, as soon as they have the calf registered, they actually have the actual CBV. So it's a case of asking the dairy farmer, and getting a sheet and having a look at it. And then as we head towards the breeding season this year, encouraging them, to use the high BSI Angus, Hertford Blue or Limousine, whatever he wants, to make sure he'll have high CBV calves for him next year. Because once they have the relationship built, they want to keep buying from each other.
Most definitely. Jamie, you mentioned in the study, a level of concentrate feeding that you're feeding. What level of concentrate feeding are you talking about? And did the extra carcass weight fully cover the feed costs at current prices?
Yeah, so again, Catherine, that is genotype specific in this study. As we saw in the profitability levels, the high beef merit Anguses, so the high CBV calves, had that extra growth potential to utilise that 3 kilograms of concentrate fed from the 1st of July to the middle of August, and again the 5 kilograms of concentrate fed from the middle of August until finishing. On the other hand, on the opposite end of the spectrum, we had our Holstein Friesian steers, who also got that 90 days feeding at grass, but we couldn't reduce slaughter age in them bullocks at all. They just didn't have that genetic potential to both match that growth, that lean protein growth, with fat deposition. So we were unable to draft them animals from slaughter. So it really is about selecting the right animal to get that extra concentrate supplementation and allowing our lower merit animals to undergo a more conventional finishing period.
That's great, Jamie. Peter, kind of similar question for you, I suppose. Did the clover system reduce total concentrate use or just improve weight gain?
So in this phase of the Derrypatrick, we just looked at it to give them the same concentrate amount of feed, and so it improved weight gain. But what we're seeing is they're probably growing really well in that red clover silage plus meal over the first winter. That's second cut red clover silage, and they're probably growing in excess of what they need to, because they get concentrated growth in the second grazing season. So the next phase of Derrypatrick is going to not feed concentrates to the red clover silage over the first winter, so it gets the same animal growth as the ones on grass silage with meal, and instead we can use that meal from saving from the first winter to feed during the finishing phase. So
and the next question links with that, for the next phase of the Derrypatrick herd, what is the meal feeding strategy for the Shirley heifers and the Shirley bullocks?
Yeah, so look, one of the treatments will be probably feeding around 5 kilos of head per day for the last 60 days at their grass. So look, previous studies in Grange would show suckler bred steers in the autumn time at 17 to 19 months of age, they'll have, for every 8 kilos of meal you'll feed, they'll have 1 kilo of carcass gain. So if you fed 300 kilos of meal in the back end of the year, you'll get about 37 kilos of carcass, so it costs you €100. You get carcass value extra of 260 or 70 euro. So there's a profit there to be made of around 160 or so euro per head if you get that really good response that we've seen previously. But we'll be looking at that again in the next phase.
It'll be interesting to see what comes from that research study.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Doreen, a question in relation to Peter. Peter mentioned 1 and 2 star on fat PTA. When selecting bulls to breed animals that will lay down fat earlier, should they not be 4 or 5 star on the trait?
Yeah, basically it should be called the leanness index, really, because the 1 or 2 are the fattest.
Yeah.
The 4 or 5 are the leanest. Do you know what I mean? And the way all our brains think is 4 and 5 star is the top. Yeah. So if you called it a leanness index, 4 or 5 is the leanest, 1 or 2 is the fattest.
Yeah, it's confusing the way it's
labelled. Yeah, it's confusing, the thinking leanness, yeah. And so call it a leanness index and you'll get it right.
Do you want to comment on that, Peter? I suppose from what you're seeing with regard to, you're picking the bulls at that stage.
Yeah, no, it's just, look, yeah, it's 1 and 2 star for carcass fat is actually fatter stuff, so what you think, but just bear in mind when you pick for fat, you will lose out a little bit on muscle, which is our confirmation, so just bear that in mind, yeah.
And that came back, I suppose, to the earlier comment you mentioned with regard to if it's a finishing system or a weaning system.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. If you're selling as weanings, you probably wouldn't be interested in that trait at all.
That's great, thanks very much. There's still lots of questions coming in here. I suppose, looking at the dairy calf to beef side of things, there's a lot of questions in relation to, calf rearing, especially this spring, you know, what advice have you for farmers with regards to the calves you're buying in, how they'll be managed from now up to weaning?
Yeah, so we're not actually changing anything in our management strategy this spring. I have heard, you know, some people saying should we be feeding more milk replacer, etc. But our management strategy in Grange is always the same. We get our calves in at 25 to 26 days of age. Up until 30 days of age, we feed them 3 litres morning and evening at 12.5% dry matter of milk replacer, and we introduce a calf starter from the very beginning. From 30 days of age until weaning at 90 kilos, we feed 4 litres a day, so 2 morning and evening at 12.5% dry matter, and we're always giving ad libitum access to concentrate. We're always, you know, wanting to develop that rumen in the calves. And following on from weaning in these calves, we keep them indoors for 4 weeks on ad libitum concentrate and straw. And a lot of the thinking behind that is about further developing the rumen of them calves. We're letting very strong calves out to grass, you know, ranging from 120 to 140 kilos around the 1st of June. And we're not running into the same digestive upsets commonly seen now at calves that are being put to grass very quickly following weaning. So we've well-developed calves going to grass, well-developed rumens, and they're well able to make use of that grass during the first grazing season.
That's great, Jamie, I suppose.
And there's one or two things there, and Jamie's, is there's an awful lot of research now, is the growth in calves in the first 10 weeks of life. So I mean, we'll set up these metabolic pathways, so I mean, which are crucial for subsequent growth and performance. So the most important thing is feed the calves well, so I mean in the first 10 to 12 weeks. Then some calves, on some farms, they're ending up with the summer scour syndrome. And the big thing with the summer scour is proper weaning. Right? So the first thing is calves should not be weaned until they're at least eaten. Start weaning them when they're eating 1.5 kilos. But definitely 1 kilo. But do not wean them until they're eating close to actually 2 kilos. And the big thing about weaning is to step it down slowly. So it's not when you wean them, but it's how you wean them. So I mean, over a 2 or 3 week period. Because it's that slow weaning, getting them adjusted. And Jamie's suggesting there, if keeping calves inside, so I mean, before they hit grass, and making sure, I mean, they're eating the concentrates and so forth, or else introduce them to grass slowly and keep the concentrates at grass. Because it's all about gradual and keeping them well fed. But how you wean is absolutely crucial.
That 2 to 3 weeks that you mentioned, you know, stepping down gradually, that's key for that weaning process.
Absolutely. So I mean, drop each couple of days, drop by 25% the milk.
That's great.
And make sure that they're eating the 1.5 kilos before you start weaning. And that's consistently across the group for 3 days.
Yeah, as Doreen said, you know, we are talking about feeding a lot of extra concentrates for that month, but we have calves doing 1.2 kilograms a day when they're indoors. We're talking a feed conversion efficiency of 3 to 1. It's that most efficient time the calf is ever going to be in their lives. And moreover, if somebody's maybe selling calves after weaning, you know, this is turning we're turning the calves into a more valuable product. Every extra kilo is worth €5 a kilo at market at the minute. So, you know, it is important to have well-developed calves at every stage of the system.
Most definitely. I think we've covered an awful lot tonight. And finally, to wrap up, can I just ask each of you of a comment? I suppose we've covered a lot looking at what research has happened already in Grange, but looking to the future, you know, what research needs to be carried out? Peter, maybe I'll come to you first.
Yeah, so look, I mean, we've great opportunity now. Beef price is very good, so it's about maximising your daily performance of your animals. So look, using the correct grazing management, so like say your clover, to increase that a real cheap daily gain for such a great extra profit, and just matching your correct sire to your correct system in order, I suppose, to make the most of what you're trying to achieve.
That's great. And Jamie?
Yeah, so at the minute, as the video showed, we're looking at the 4 main beef breeds being used on the dairy herd in our Angus, Hereford, Limousin and Belgian Blue. So what we want to see is the CBV applicable across breed, and does it mean the same for our early maturing and our late maturing cross calves? And in addition, moving forward, we're also going to be taking a closer look at the effect of DAM genetic merit on calf performance, so looking at high and low merit Holstein Friesian cows and its effect on calf performance.
That's great, Jimmy. And Doreen, from an industry perspective, what are your thoughts?
I think from our point of view, the most important thing is the indexes we have are accurate. And that's why we need Teagasc Grange is to keep working with the index, keep developing them, and what index is most applicable for different systems. As with beef in Ireland, we have different herd owners and different land types. Some of them want to produce top class weanings, more of them want to produce very heavy carcasses, more of them want to produce off grass. So I mean, what index should they be using and what's the most profitable? And the one thing I would say this year is for farmers is start measuring performance, especially the guys buying the dairy beef calves. Weigh them every week. It's easy to weigh calves. And if you're only hitting 0.6 or 0.7 kilos a day, there is something wrong. You should be hitting 0.8, 0.9, you know what I mean? And early intervention is key.
Regular weighing is very important from that part.
Absolutely.
That's great. We'll bring the webinar to a close at this point. Before we finish, I'd like to offer a few words of thanks. First, my sincere thanks to Peter, Doreen and Jamie for sharing their time, insights and expertise this evening. As we look ahead to the breeding season in 2026, it's clear from our conversation that genetics remain one of the most powerful tools to improve long-term profitability. Early calf management and achieving target weight gains are critical to system performance. It's evident from both presentations, sustainability improvements and profitability can go hand in hand when systems are well managed. Collaboration between research, advisory and breeding organisations is essential to future-proof Irish beef production. Don't forget to put in your diaries July 1st for the National Beef 2026 Open Day at Teagasc Grange, which will be a day not to be missed. Can I also take this opportunity to remind you of the weekly Beef Edge podcast, which is available wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you to our production team, Declan McCardle and Charlie Smith, who have been working behind the scenes to ensure everything has run seamlessly. And finally, thanks to you, our audience, for joining us in such high numbers tonight. Your questions and comments have greatly enriched our discussion. On behalf of the entire panel, I'd like to wish you a very happy and safe calving season. Thank you and good night.